So, this happened back when I was 17. I can't remember exactly why. I was walking down that street, but it was a rather dangerous street in the city. Pretty late at night, by the way. I walked past a private showgirl house, where girls were trying to attract customers, and also came across a druggie house, to give you an idea of where I was. Along my walk, I passed a dark parking lot and suddenly heard a man say, "Hey," in a hushed tone. Turning around, I searched and found an absolute unit of a man lurking in the shadows, his face hidden.
"Yes?"
I asked timidly. He proceeded to try to flirt with me, complimenting me a lot and trying to offer me dinner. Literally, no restaurants are open at this time. I was very shy and scared back then, so I kept politely declining, but he just wouldn't stop badgering. He was determined to take me somewhere, presumably on a date. Finally, after a few minutes of me just straight up declining, he started walking towards me quickly. I braced myself, going into a defensive position, when he stopped just at the end of the parking lot, before the lights. I still couldn't see him. Then, he said in a smooth, calm tone that a pretty girl like me should be careful, because he knew there was a man around here picking up girls in a white truck, raping them, murdering them, and then dumping the bodies. Fully freaked out, red alarms blaring in my mind, I started to walk backwards away from this creep. That's when I saw what I will always remember. He walked over to a car in the dark part of the lot that I hadn't noticed, opened the car door, and got into a white truck. I turned and sprinted away, hearing him rev his engine and tear out of the parking lot. Thankfully, I lost him, cutting through other areas and sprinting like a madman. But Jesus Christ, I'll never forget that absolutely terrifying man. Let's never, ever meet again. This story happened when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I was born in a provincial area, so not many people around, especially during noon. I'm a boyish girl and would climb up our green mango tree in our yard as a hobby. Fresh air and shade from the tree is amazing. Beside the tree was our wall fence that I could sit on after climbing up. It's not too tall, so adults can actually look over it if they get close enough. It's a little thin too. I would sit there, facing our home, my back on the streets. So it was a normal day, just like what I described, but it was soon cut off when a stranger poked the lower part of my back, close to my butt. I turned around, and there I saw a man. His eyes were swollen. That's the first thing I noticed, and he chuckled from my reaction. He struggled to speak for a while, stuttering until he managed to ask,
"Do you know a girl named Anna?"
then pointed to the house in front of ours. Now, I grew up in this area, and I know that the house he's referring to were never occupied by anyone. I don't want to talk much, so I just said, "No." He nods and said that this Anna was a girl he met through text, and she asked him to meet him at her house, which was the one he pointed to a minute ago. Told him that no one's been there for forever. He chuckled again this time, and I can see from his movements that he's nervous, fidgety. I started to feel scared, as then nerded out. And then, a little voice in my head that belonged to my mom told me not to talk to strangers. I really wasn't listening to what the hell he's saying until I noticed him staring at me. I get goosebumps remembering him. He proceeded to ask me who I was and who was in the house. I told him my parents and my older siblings, but that was a lie. It was only my sister who was with me that time. Pretty much, I've confirmed by now that this person wants to do something bad, but I don't really want to run right now, because he might follow me inside, and my sister was only a teenager, and this guy was carrying a heavy-looking backpack. Don't want to know what was inside me, really. I let him talk a while, thinking of a way to slip off the conversation. I'm not really doing great, because I was too scared and nervous about everything that was happening in front of me. He suddenly changed the subject and said,
"You might fall from there."
Told him that I could manage, but this man just semi-carried me to move an inch sideward. I'm trembling as I write this. Just the memory of it scares me. Anyway, every time I think back to that act of his, I can now tell that he's figuring out how heavy I was, or how he can take me away. At that time, I was feeling so weak, and I can't say anything. I want to scream for help, but I felt frozen in place. He then positioned himself in a way that he'll need more strength, putting his other foot forward and ready to touch me again, but he was stopped by my grandma. God bless her. My grandma has difficulty in remembering us, but they let her walk sometimes since we live in a subdivision and everyone knows her. What shocked me was it was noon, and they don't let her walk during 10 a.m. through 3 p.m. most times, since it was too hot, but somehow she was there. She started to shoo the man away, and gestured for me to go inside. And just like magic, I jumped down, ran inside the house, and watched from the window what was happening. I have the house phone in hand, just in case. Thankfully, nothing happened. The man left, upset, and I never saw him again after that. Though, for some weeks, I was very careful, especially when not many people were around. I never go outside unless my cousin was with me. From that day on, I also started to believe that my grandmother might be guided by either my dad's spirit or my guardian angel. Or maybe both, to save me from what might possibly have been an abduction. As I said before, it still gives me chills to this day. So, weirdo, who tried to take me away from my family. Let's never meet again. This story happened around 10 years ago, and I think I did a good job at blocking it out of my memory until now. I drove past the same shop earlier today, on the way home from a house call for work, and have been thinking about it since. I was around 13 years old, and my grandfather took me and my younger brother, who was 5, for a day out at the theme park. We had a great time, and then went to the chicken shop on the way home. This chicken shop is a popular shop, famous for its chicken made with 11 herbs and spices. We went to the shop, waited in the queue, and sat down in the restaurant with our food. Now, as I stated before, my brother was 5, and he was completely tuckered out when we got to the shop, and made no secret of the fact that he hated chicken. He didn't. He just wanted to go home. My grandfather told him to wait just a few minutes until we had finished our meal, and then we could go home. My brother continued being a typical little pissy 5-year-old who refused to eat his food, threw chips on the floor, and attempted to dance around on the table. Now, my grandfather isn't known for his discipline skills, and when he noticed the man was eating with his chicken on the table opposite of us, he thought of a plan. The man was around 40 years old, was bald, and was sat with a girl who was around 11, and a boy who was maybe around 13. My grandfather took the opportunity to tell my brother,
See that man over there? He's a police officer, and he told me to tell you to behave.
The man wasn't dressed like a police officer, nor did he give any indication that he was one. The man played along, though, and told my brother,
Yeah, I'm a police officer, and we have punishment for little boys who won't eat their food.
At this point, my brother accepted defeat, and even managed to eat some of his chicken strips, but I couldn't help but feel the hot gaze of the policeman staring at me from across the room. We finished our food and started walking towards the exit, hoping my younger brother would follow after us, as he had now decided that he no longer wanted to leave. Then I saw the man out of the corner of my eye, looking at me through a door that led to the bathrooms. The door had a clear glass panel cut out in the shape of diamonds from the bottom to the top of it. He was smiling at me excitedly and made a "come here" motion with his hand, while also mouthing the words, "Come here." I felt a bit off about the situation, but stupidly, I started walking towards the door. I opened it and was about to follow the man into the gentleman's bathroom. I was a pretty trusting and stupid teenager. It was at this moment that my younger brother slipped off one of the tables and whacked his head pretty hard on the floor. He obviously started screaming, and I was turned back and ran towards him. I picked him up, and my grandfather rushed back, and we took him to the hospital. He ended up needing stitches in his head. I forgot all about the man until I saw his face on the front of the local newspaper just over a year ago, and he was sent to prison for raping a 12-year-old girl. and I haven't eaten fried chicken since. So, I'm not too sure about the timing, but I want to say I'm around 15, 16. My mom, stepdad, brother, and my brother's girlfriend all went out to the local pub for maybe an hour before this happened. I was home alone with my twin sister, and we had just finished watching Mamma Mia. Right as the credits were on, we go to grab snacks from the kitchen, and I am stood in the hallway when I hear a knock on the door. It must have been 8 or 9 p.m. at the latest, so not even too late. Standing with his face pressed right against the window on the door is this 40-year-old man. I freeze on the spot and watch as this guy tries opening the letterbox and go through it. He bends down and says,
"Hey, little girls, let me in."
I told my twin to get round the corner to the kitchen, and I noticed with absolute dread that the front door was not locked. I slowly made my way to the front door, taking slow steps and not breaking eye contact with the guy at all, and quickly put the chain on as I did not have the key. At this point, I ran back to my twin, and she was already on the phone to my mom. It was awful in that moment, as we were trying to whisper and tell them to come home, but she could not understand us at all. Soon enough, she understood, and told my brother and stepdad, who were running back to us. Throughout this, the guy was still talking to us through the letterbox, saying stuff like,
"Please let me in, please."
And we were hiding around the corner with our dog and a knife. After maybe 5 to 10 minutes, after hanging up, I heard my brother and stepdad at the door, and they made sure we were okay and told us they didn't see anyone at all. It could have been some drunk guy, but that horrible feeling of dread just sunk into me, and I knew that this wasn't a good situation at all. I know some of you may be shocked that I didn't call the police, but this was the first sketchy thing to happen to me, and it didn't spring to mind in that instance. So, man who wanted me and my younger twin to let you in while we were home alone, let's not meet again. In 2015, I moved to NYC with my family from Chile, and then my boyfriend came over to visit me. We were both 18 years old at the time, and our first language is Spanish. We had basically made it our goal to visit most of New York City, including non-tourist places. Off the beaten path places and stuff. So one day, we decided to go to the only borough we've not been to, Staten Island. We cross over on the ferry and hop on a bus to South Beach at around noon or so. We spend the whole afternoon on the beach, chatting, taking pictures and such, and walking along the beach in the direction of the ferry terminal. As it starts to get dark, my mom calls me and tells me to come home soon because now she's starting to get worried. So, slightly pissed at the fun being over, we decided to wait for a bus because we thought it would take less time rather than walking all the way back. We waited for a really long time until finally one came up and we got on. By this point, it was already dark, but the bus seemed alright to me. Normal people on it going about their business. We were sitting at the front, behind the driver, on a row of seats, and I'm just on my phone, looking at Google Maps so as not to miss our stop, while I was talking to my boyfriend in Spanish. When suddenly he says, in hushed tones, that something is off, that he's got a weird feeling about this bus. He has my full attention at that point, because he's not someone to have an intuition or anything of the sort. So he tells me to look at the man in front of us, and that he's holding a flip phone. At this point, I'm really confused, because I don't see the problem. So I look up, trying not to make it obvious we were talking about him, and I see the dude in front of me. He was looking straight back at me. He was sitting with his legs wide open on the opposite row, fiddling with the flip phone between his legs. He was staring at me with a really creepy smile on his face. It was as if he knew we were talking about him, and I was gonna look up. He knew we were scared. My boyfriend, very quietly and in Spanish, tells me that the dude has been texting back and forth on his phone, constantly exchanging looks with another dude sat on the back of the bus who was also on his phone texting. He says it's weird that someone in this day and age has a flip phone, and that it looks like a phone you'd have to throw away later. So I say to him,
"Do you think he wants to steal my phone?"
which was a shitty $50 LG, but was the only thing of value on us at the time. We weren't carrying any bags, expensive clothes, nothing. Just jeans, hoodies, and my phone. My boyfriend didn't even have his own phone on him because he didn't have data in America. He responds, "No, that's not what he wants. He's been staring at you the whole time, texting and exchanging glances with the man at the back, and looking at me, smirking. He knows I know he's looking at you. Also, look at the guy sitting to your right. He was sitting at the back next to the second guy, and he changed seats a few minutes ago, and he's right next to you now." At this point, I've been staring at the ground while he hushes all of this, and I look up ever so slightly, and to my surprise, there's a third dude sitting right next to me. I was on the end of the row of seats, and he was sitting on the first pair of seats that are perpendicular to the row. I start looking at all three guys, and each time I make eye contact with them, as if they've been expecting, or at the very least, minding what I was doing. He tells me all three men have been exchanging glances. The one sitting perpendicular to me just switched his seat from the back to be closer, and the guy in front of us seems the most intimidating because he keeps smirking and seems to be the one planning or whatever. I agree, he's got a sort of alpha attitude, if you will. Anyway, we sit uncomfortably for about half a minute, thinking something is about to go down. The atmosphere was tense. I could feel their eyes piercing through me. By this point, it was clear all three of them were in it. But it was already dark out. Buses were clearly not very frequent and we were scared to get off and have them follow behind us. So we reached a stop where one of the few other people on the bus, an older lady with a little shopping cart, rings the bell and starts getting up from her seat. We then decide to stay really still and just run off the bus when she steps off. We did exactly that, remained in our seats as the lady was hopping off the bus. One foot off, the other still on, and we just literally ran and got off just as the doors were closing. We waited for the next bus, which had more people on it, and obviously didn't feel that same weird energy, and got to the terminal to take the ferry back to Manhattan. Always looking back over our shoulders, of course. We got home and told my parents about it. My dad went white as a sheet and told me to never go back to Staten Island, even though he's not one to worry much. My mom, on the other hand, had nearly threw a fit. She said she'd had a bad feeling and just wanted me to come home, and that was why she had called me. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if we didn't get off the bus then and there. I had never felt such relief as when I got off. It's really scary to think about, but I genuinely think, and my boyfriend agreed to this, that because of the way they stared at me and looked at him sort of like mocking him, it was probably something much more serious than a robbery. Whatever would have happened, I hope I never, ever meet them again. So, a few years ago, my boyfriend's dad's family decided to get together, and I'll chip in to rent a condo in Ontario and get together. There was a big extended family over there that his dad never saw because he only ever really got along with one of his 3 sisters. My boyfriend's mom had talked him into going though, and they let me tag along because I'd been around long enough that they liked me and trusted me. I can't remember where everyone else had gone. I think it was to the beach for what was probably like the 3rd time that day. It was just me and my boyfriend at the condo, because we were kind of sick at the beach and just wanted to do nothing in the shade for a while. We were sitting outside, looking out over the water, and just kind of talking about life. I had just finished reading the Harry Potter series, so we were just kind of talking about that for a bit, when this woman comes out of the brush beside the condo. Just to help paint the picture, this condo was on about an acre of land, maybe, and it was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. The front of the condo was probably 70 feet from a dirt road. No one traveled down, really. And there were some dense trees and brush and whatnot that surrounded 3 sides of it. This woman comes out of the wooded area, and I immediately knew something wasn't right. She was limping, and she only had on 1 sandal. And frankly, she looked like shit. She was pale, and her face was gone. She was really, really pretty, but she just looked exhausted. The thing that immediately caught my attention was her baby, who she was holding pretty tightly in her arms as she started to come toward us. I didn't really know what to do, but my boyfriend immediately got up and walked over to make sure she was okay. couldn't help but think about all these awful things that might happen. After spending so many hours hearing and listening to these stories on Reddit, I was just terrified she'd do something. My boy is a lot more trusting than I am, though, and he's always had the first instinct of, what's the problem and how can I help? He's never assumed the bad in anybody. So this woman is just sobbing by the time she gets to the porch of the condo, and she looks like she's just been through a war zone. She's shaking, hyperventilating, and crying, and she's telling us that basically her boyfriend had been drunk for a while, and he's been getting worse and worse, and he's been an overall abusive guy. He'd get pissed whenever she was focusing on the baby instead of him, and part of what pissed him off was it wasn't his kid, so he kind of didn't care about the baby at all. She told us how this time in particular, he was drunk and she was driving him home with the baby in the back seat, and he grabbed the baby's booster seat and tore it out of the car and threw it out the window while they were driving. She got the baby out of the seat or something. I don't remember how, because as she's telling us about how he started hitting her before she took the baby and ran, we hear this yelling, and we turn and see this angry dude walking up to the condo, and she starts losing it. Drunk and angry, this guy followed her to our condo and was starting to come up to us. He was trying to act like he wasn't pissed. He was doing a, "Oh, you guys found her, thank you so much, maybe let's go home," kind of thing. But he was slurring his speech and not doing a good job of hiding how pissed he was. My boy's always been a pacifist. Honestly, he's even kind of a pushover. He's really non-confrontational and tries to find a way to talk stuff out and come to an agreement before doing anything. But before I could even say anything, he's across the yard and approaching this guy. As much of a pacifist as he is, he's also huge. He's built like a football player. He's 6'3", and at the time, he was 280 pounds. I've known my boy since we were 10. At the time, we were 20, and we'd been dating for just over a year. I knew him better than anyone. He's never done anything like this before, but he goes up to this guy and goes, "Not another step, dude." And he's shaking as he says it. This guy tries to walk around my boy. He goes, "No, it's okay, I'm just gonna take her home." And my boy steps in front of him and shakes his head. "You're drunk," he said. "So I'm gonna pretend like maybe you didn't hear what I just told you. Don't come any closer." At this point, the guy stops trying to pretend, and he says something like, "You don't know what's going on. That's my girlfriend, and I'm gonna take her home." And he tries rounding my boyfriend again. And one more time, my boyfriend blocks him and goes, "Stop. Stop." I've never heard this tone in his voice before, or since. It was scary. It wasn't him. The guy tried one more time before my boy finally put his hand on his chest and pushed him back a bit, keeping his hand on the guy's chest. "I'm telling you right now, you're not going anywhere near that girl or her kid, so turn the fuck around and walk away." This guy was about 5'6", maybe 5'7". So when he looked up to threaten my boyfriend, he had looked like a kid, The guy finally looks up at my boyfriend, and he says something that I couldn't hear. My boyfriend said something back, and then the guy stared at him for a moment, like he was deciding whether or not to do anything. My boyfriend finally pushed him away, and the guy stumbled back, and then started pointing at me and the girl as he was saying something. And then he started to walk away. I didn't learn till the next day, but the guy told my boy that he had a gun and that he was coming back, and that he'd kill him and I if we stopped him again. My boyfriend's response to this changes depending on who's telling the story. Originally, he told me that he told the guy he'd feed him his own teeth, which made me laugh, because he's such a dork, and he got that from a movie. And ever since then, the line he tells him is, "I'll be waiting." The woman was sobbing, the baby was sobbing, and I was shaking because even though he didn't throw any punches or anything, I could tell that he was ready to hurt this guy if anything else happened. We called the police and didn't really do much of anything outside of making sure everyone was breathing and take the girl to her sister's place. We didn't really hear much from her after, but I know my boyfriend sent her an email once or twice, and she's married now to someone else and had another kid since last time we talked. Overall, it was a really nice trip, despite that part. And the fight my boy's dad got into with someone in his family. Alright, so this took place about 18 years ago. I was around 5 years old at the time. My dad, younger brother, and I were at a popular theme park about an hour out from where we lived. It's worth noting that this park has a heavy safari theme, and most of the employees wore khaki, cargo-style uniforms. It's a sweltering hot day in a subtropical state, which may or may not be heavily associated with alligators, citrus fruit, and the clinically insane. Regardless, we're drinking enough water to effortlessly drown a horse and need to find a restroom. For scene setting, the men's restroom had a large L-shaped hallway just before the entrance, aptly preventing the park from being accosted by schlongs. There are no closed doors, just the hallway and an opening on either side, so sound traveled fairly easily. My dad hustled my little brother inside and tells me to wait for them while facing the corner of the L-shaped hallway, and stresses that I should not talk to anybody. Shortly thereafter, somebody approaches me, asking if I was lost. As a youngin', I was a stickler for rules and would never intentionally disobey my dad, so I kept staring straight ahead into the corner. I likely took his instructions a bit too literally, but again, I was 5. Now, I was also afraid of being rude and ignoring another person, let alone an adult. So my tiny brain was at an impasse. Nonetheless, I stayed quiet. That is, until they repeated themselves, and then said that they needed to take me somewhere safe. At this point, I suppose curiosity got the best of me, and I turned around. He was a middle-aged man wearing a khaki shirt, which initially made me trust him as an authority figure, seemingly an employee of the park. Now, I was afraid that I was breaking the rules by being near the men's restroom. Again, I was 5. Followed the rules too intensely. You get it. But the man had no name tag, no park memorabilia, no walkie-talkie, nothing other than his faded khaki shirt to imply that he may have worked there at all. It's also worth mentioning that nobody else had entered or exited the restroom during this exchange, and I did not see any other person in our immediate vicinity outside of the restroom. At this point, the man became frustrated. He stopped asking and began demanding. He could likely tell that I was uneasy, and began telling me that I wasn't supposed to be here, and that I had to leave with him now. I was too afraid to call out for my dad, and simultaneously terrified that I'd broken the park rules. At this point, my dad is cued in and he shouts, "Aether Gopher, stay right where you are, you hear me?" Or something very similar to that effect. From my dad's perspective, this must have been terrifying. Mid-fucking stream, hearing an older man raising their voice to his young daughter. What's a dude supposed to do? This is where things become clearly sinister. The man grabs my forearm and jolts me forward, just enough to startle me, and tells me that he is going to take me out of there, far away. Fuck. I still remember the intonation of those words perfectly. Still too afraid to speak or scream, I must have just stared blankly back at him. Immediately, my dad shouts, "I'm coming out right now, Aether Gopher!" And the man finally got spooked. He must have realized that his window of opportunity had come and gone, because he released his tight grip, turned a corner, and disappeared. This entire exchange, from my dad exiting the hallway to the man rushing away after grabbing me, couldn't have lasted longer than a minute. Dad rushes out seconds later with my 3-year-old brother in tow, visibly shaken, asking what happened and why I moved out from the corner. At this point, I just broke down, sobbing out of confusion and terror, certainly beyond the point of being able to explain that this man jerked me forward and then disappeared. My dad was unable to hear exactly what the man had said to me, but from the restroom he could tell it was aggressive, and that was a big fucking no-no for an overprotective dad. Honestly, the fact he let me out of his sight at all for even a minute was uncharacteristic, and didn't happen often again until I was older. The rest of the day is a blur. It was such a long time ago. I'm not even certain if my dad contacted park security, but if he did, I have no recollection of the man being discovered. We left shortly thereafter and spent the rest of the day at home, watching movies. I've been back to the park dozens of times since, and have never felt unsafe or had a comparable experience. So,
creepy, khaki-wearing guy who might have tried to kidnap me from a theme park while my dad's hands were tied. Let's not meet again.
This isn't as scary as most stories you read out there, but it was terrifying to me. So, let me start out by describing myself and my job. I work at the movie theater, and on this day, I was working as a greeter, which is the person that rips your ticket and tells you where to go for your movie. I am also a smaller girl in a wheelchair, and this day would be the first day I would be driving home by myself. Meaning I would be taking a while to take apart my wheelchair and putting it in my car alone, which took up to 10 minutes at the time. I will also note that, even though I was 17 at the time, I look very young, and still get mistaken for a 15-year-old at nearly 21 years of age. My weakened position makes this incident even more alarming. I was at work one morning, sitting and reading Brave New World by Huxley, and occasionally sneaking a glance at my phone, when a man walks in. He seemed friendly enough, but the first thing I noticed was that he was at the theater at 10 a.m. for a movie that would start at 3:30 p.m. That movie was Finding Dory. It was weird, but we have a pleasant conversation. I point him towards his theater, and everything is good until later, when the weird shit starts happening. I was sitting there, minding my own business, and I noticed that this guy keeps taking frequent bathroom breaks. But he's walking across the entire theater to go use the restroom. The theater is huge, housing 30 theaters, and there are 2, wings of theaters. Instead of using the restroom by his own theater, he would walk all the way across the establishment to pay me while going over, talking to me every time. He first walked over, asking for my name, and then held out his hand. I went to shake it, and when I grabbed his hand, he just held it there, which was super awkward. Later, I went to the restroom, realizing this shit is creepy as hell, and came back to find him speaking to my manager. He sees me and starts talking to me again. About what I don't remember, and I'm not sure, to be honest, and actually caresses my face with his hand. At this point, I was freaking the fuck out and was petrified with fear. I was sitting there, texting my friend while shaking pretty badly, just waiting for the time at which his movie starts to come on. Then he comes over for the last time. This guy put his arm around my shoulders, leaned into my ear and said, "Where do you go to school?" When he did that, I was freaking the fuck out inside, and just managed to say,
I'm in high school.
which was my go-to thing, as people often think I'm older than I am. He then left to go to the restroom again, likely trying not to be suspicious by lingering around for too long. I quickly texted my mom that said to come to my work, as I was no longer comfortable putting my wheelchair in my car all on my own. I had my family come help me with my chair, and when I got home, I looked up local sex offenders. In my search, I was positive I had found this dude on the list. So, predator, I hope we never meet again. And I hope all children stay safe from you. I can't remember exactly when this happened, but I think it was March 2019, when I was 17. I quite often get the train into London to visit my boyfriend. I go up on Friday or Saturday and come back Sunday evening. My parents always told me, quite rightly, to try and get an early train home on Sunday in order to avoid traveling late by myself. But me being naive and stupid always accidentally missed the earlier trains in order to spend more time with my boyfriend. This particular Sunday, I was getting a train that got into the station where I lived at around 9 p.m. My station is the last stop on the line, and where the train terminates, so by the end of the journey, it is always relatively empty. Sometimes I'm the only one getting off, aside from the guard. Usually I would just put my noise-canceling headphones on, settle down, and zone out of whatever was happening around me. I'm quite an anxious traveler, so blocking out the sound helps me relax. I also try and sit at the end of the carriage, where there aren't as many people, as having lots of people around can make me more susceptible to anxiety attacks. After this evening, I always made sure to sit near people. I'm sitting with my headphones on, tucked away with my suitcase in the footwell of the seat next to me, when I notice a man stumble into the seats adjacent to mine across the aisle. He leans across the seats, looks directly at me, and mumbles something. He was wearing all black, a massive black coat, and had a big duffel bag. I, a little anxious because I'm not the biggest of fans of talking to strangers, take off my headphones and politely ask him to repeat himself. His speech is slurred, making what he is saying completely incoherent. But after he repeated himself several times, I realize he's asking if I know if there are any taxi companies at my station. I say no, sorry, and put my headphones back on. He leans over again and asks me the same question. I take my headphones off and give him the same reply. No, I don't know of any. Sorry. He says something else. I ask him to repeat himself, because his speech is so slurred, I don't know what he is saying. The strange conversation goes on for about 20 minutes. I can't understand much of what he is saying. He's sort of half mumbling, half speaking, and he's not really making much sense. He keeps asking me how I'm getting home and where I live. I just say by car and don't say anything about where I live. I'm super nervous now because this guy just gave me the creeps. I had a feeling something bad was going to happen, and he is starting to make me uncomfortable. There was just this vibe about him that he was bad news. He then asks me if I'm going to call the police on him. I say no, and he starts mumbling and swearing profusely. He mumbles something about beating my fucking brains in. At that point, I was really starting to freak out.
All of a sudden, he moves across the aisle to sit in the seat next to mine, trapping me in my seat. I can't escape. I'm sitting next to the window, and he's completely blocking the aisle. I'd have to awkwardly climb over him to leave. I've decided he must be high or drunk because his eyes look absolutely crazy and his speech is so slurred. He tells me I'm very beautiful and asks if I have a boyfriend, moving closer until I could feel his breath on my face. I look around to see if there is anyone in the carriage with me, but I can't see anymore. He leans in really close, and I'm freaking out now. But luckily the train guard comes through from the next carriage, sees me looking very scared, and comes over to ask if everything is okay. Immediately, this guy's demeanor changes. He leans away from me, and he waves his hand as if to say nothing is wrong. I say yes, everything is okay, but by the look on my face, the guard can tell I'm super uncomfortable. The guard makes small talk with the guy, and then moves to stand by the door behind us. I don't know what to do. Even though the guard is behind me, I still feel really unsafe, and know I have to get away from this man. I asked the guy if he would move back to his seat, and say I don't want to talk to him, as he's making me uncomfortable. He moves back, and starts muttering and swearing again, mumbling half-formed threats under his breath. I call my dad, who's picking me up, and when he answers the phone, I immediately say, "Hey, Dad." The guy looks at me and says, I'm sorry, I didn't know you had a dad." He tries to talk to me whilst I'm on the phone. He's talking over me the whole time, but I can't actually make out what he's saying. I have no idea how to try and communicate to my dad that I'm not feeling safe and this weirdo is talking to me without him overhearing. The train is pulling into the final stop, so I pull my suitcase out of the footwell to try and make a quick exit from the train. The guy gets up really quick and goes in front of me and grabs my suitcase to take it off the train and steal it, presumably. I still had my hand on it and managed to pull it out of his grip. He gets off the train quickly, and I stand next to the guard for a couple of minutes because I didn't want to get off the train at the same time as this guy. I'm already anxious and tired, and this may seem like something insignificant, but I suffer with really bad anxiety, and it really creeped me out. A lady comes over. I don't know how she knew I was crying about what had just happened with this guy. She must have seen him getting off the train. She says he was asking her about taxis and making her feel uncomfortable, until she told him to ask someone else. She apologizes for sending him my way. They both offer to walk me to my car. Luckily, my dad is sitting in the parking lot, and I get in the car safe and sound. There is no sign of where the guy on the train went. I wish the story stopped here. We make a stop at a small supermarket on the way home, and usually my dad would send me in to get whatever we needed. But because I'm still upset from the train, I sit in the car in the deserted parking lot. As soon as my dad enters the supermarket, a car pulls up on the other side of the lot. I see the same guy from the train in the passenger seat, and my blood runs cold. The car he's in isn't a taxi either. Which I found strange, as that's what he was originally asking me about. I sink down in the seat, hoping he doesn't see me, but it's like he already knows I'm in the car. He starts pointing at me and talking to the driver. They get out of the car and start walking through the lot towards me. I immediately lock the doors. My phone is in my bag, which is in the boot, so all I can do is sit there and pray my dad is going to come back any moment. They've nearly made it to the car when my dad gets back. He was only going in for bread. They see him and start walking immediately in the other direction, towards the supermarket. I yell at my dad to get in the car. I'm crying so hard, and by the time my dad got into the driver's seat, the men are nowhere to be seen. I managed to calm down enough to tell my dad, between sobs, about how the guy from the train was in the parking lot in a car with someone, and that they were walking towards me. I point at the car they were in, and my dad doesn't say much, just starts driving home. When we get home and my mom has managed to calm me down a bit more, my dad tells me he noticed the same car driving behind us when we left the station, meaning they must have followed us from the station to the supermarket. I felt really embarrassed, like I was overreacting and making a fuss over nothing, because I'm just oversensitive with bad anxiety. When the guy started talking to me on the train, I felt physically sick and just had this overwhelming feeling something bad was going to happen. Even though I have high anxiety. I usually don't get these feelings just from talking to a stranger. So, creepy guy who harassed me on a train and then followed my car. I don't know what your intentions were, but let's not meet again.
Thank you all for listening. Please, if you have not already, leave me a like and subscribe to this channel. Also, visit my gaming channel. The link will be in the description down below, along with the links to the stories I have read here today. I hope my telling of these tales has entertained you, as well as caused a shiver to run down your spine. Till next time, farewell.